Greetings, everybody. Welcome to your video series on an introduction to sociology. The topic for this video, Lawrence Kohlberg and Carol Gilligan. Let's get started. So Kohlberg and Gilligan were interested in trying to figure out and understand how we as individuals learn the difference between right and wrong, or differentiate between right and wrong. Basically, they were curious about how we come to gain our sense of morality. So Lawrence Kohlberg began to develop his theory, and he has three main stages that he believes all of us move through at some point or different points in our life. What are these three main stages? The first one he identified as the pre-conventional stage. Here he believed that people experience the world through our senses: touch, smell, hear, sight, taste. And he believed that if it feels good to us, then it must be right and we're going to do more of it. Now, obviously, this applies to really young kids. When we are little, all we know is, hey, if it feels good, it must be right. I'm going to do more of it. Ice cream tastes good. It must be right. I'm going to eat the whole gallon. If it feels bad, if I touch a hot stove, ouch, that must be wrong, right? So we develop our sense of right and wrong through our senses, according to Kohlberg. He said, but then we move into what he calls the conventional stage. The conventional stage is when we become aware of other people's feelings and we begin to connect how we behave in terms of how it impacts and affects other people. So if our behavior is hurting people or causing them harm, then in our minds, in the conventional stage, according to Kohlberg, we see that as bad. If our behavior makes people happy, makes them smile, then in the conventional stage, we equate that with good, and our behavior must be positive, and we'll do more of that. Then lastly, he says, for some people, we move into the post-conventional stage, where this is where we develop critical thinking skills, and we begin to challenge the conventional stage, which is a lot of what we've been taught is right and wrong. The post-conventional stage is when we develop our critical thinking skills and we begin to develop a sense of right and wrong based on what works for us and what may not always be in line with our conventional upbringing or the conventional things that we have been taught in that particular stage. Now, one of the purposes of college is to get students into the post-conventional stage of thinking. We want you to develop critical thinking skills. We don't want you to just buy into what we say is right and wrong, but we want you to develop an ability to figure out right and wrong for yourself. Now, it seems like these stages are pretty linear, starting from infant and into, toddlers and teens and tweens and then young adult and older adult. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Not everybody moves through these stages linear, and not everybody gets to the post-conventional stage. I'm guessing many of you can think of a friend or maybe even yourself where you're kind of stuck in that pre-conventional way of thinking, where you're basically doing what feels good to you and avoiding what it feels bad to you, even if it may be not what your conventional upbringing and teachings and the societal norms and values that you have internalized tell you. So that's Kohlberg. Again, he believes that we enter into these different stages of thinking in terms of how and when we develop a sense of right and wrong. Stand for what is right, even if it means standing alone. That would be an example of good post-conventional thinking. Now, who is Carol Gilligan? So Gilligan came along and she argued that the people who were developing these theories on human behavior, human interaction, morality were mostly men, and they were coming at their way of thinking from a male perspective. And so she entered the fray and she said she believes that men and women actually have different ways of determining what is right and wrong, or determining their own sense of morality. For men or males, she believed that males tend to have a justice perspective, meaning that right and wrong is determined by the law. If it is the law, then it must be right. If it is a violation of the law, then it must be wrong. You can see where that is closely related to Kohlberg's conventional thinking. Kind of, if it feels good, it must be right. If it feels bad, it must be wrong. For females, though, she believed that women have a very different perspective on morality. So if you have seen, for example, The Handmaid's Tale, the law is the law, right? And once the law came down and said, women can't do this or that, then that was what became right, according to Gilligan's male justice perspective, or Kohlberg's conventional thinking. And any violation of that law must be wrong or bad, according to, again, the male perspective. For females, Gilligan believed that women have a care and responsibility perspective, where they try to figure out reasons for behavior, not just that someone violated the law, but why did that person violate the law? Did they steal food because they were starving, didn't have money to buy food, had kids at home to feed? What was the reason for their behavior? She considered that more a care and responsibility perspective. If we think about the story of Anne Frank, for example, right? Protecting Anne Frank, who was of the Jewish faith in Nazi Germany, was against the law. You were not allowed to protect Jews against the Nazis. So for Gilligan, the male perspective would say, well, hey, we got to follow the law. Kohlberg would put that in the conventional thinking as well. That's the way it is. That's how society has determined what's right and wrong. But there were people who took steps to protect Anne Frank and her family. According to Gilligan's male perspective, they violated the law, they went against what was right, they committed something that would be considered bad. From the female perspective, however, if you take a larger view of what was happening in Germany at the time, of course you would want to protect people of the Jewish faith, even though it was against the law. That would be more of a care and responsibility perspective. So Gilligan does hit on something important here, that there are different ways of interpreting morality, but she does come in for some criticism in linking it to gender. There are plenty of men, for example, who have a care and responsibility perspective, and there are plenty of women who have a justice perspective. So the gender piece is a little less accurate, but the idea that there are different ways of interpreting morality, one based on justice, one based on care and responsibility, was an interesting observation on the part of Gilligan. That's going to do it for now. Thanks for checking in. Never stop learning, and remember, sociology is everywhere.